Hello, and welcome to the First Stitch podcast, where we tell the stories of how everyday quilters just like you got started quilting, plus talk about some other fun quilty things along the way. This is your host, Lisa Donnelly from Wild Plum Lane. Let's get started. Welcome back to the First Stitch. I'm so glad you're here because this week's quilter story has so many layers to it. Today we hear from Janet, a self-described beginner quilter who learned alongside her mom. After her story, I've got a work-in-progress finishing tip that connects directly to something Janet mentioned as her biggest frustration. That tricky gap between what you picture in your head and what actually comes together in fabric. And then I'm sharing some of my quilting freebies that can help you visualize your future quilts. Here's Janet's story, in her own words. I'm a beginner quilter. My mom quilted and has photos of all the ones she's done. I have her photo album now and her sewing machine. I'm not sure when she started quilting, but she gave a quilt to each of her 9 grandchildren, all different patterns, and helped a couple of her granddaughters make rag quilts. Mom's favorite was going into quilting stores whenever she traveled and buying fabrics she loved because she might use them at some point. I'm sure she made well over 100 quilts. My mom taught me paper piecing to start, and then helped me with a couple of table runners. In 2014, we were expecting twin granddaughters, and I wanted to make quilts for them. Of course, Mom was eager to help, and we worked together on the first one. The second one I thought would be so easy, as I was using the same pattern as the first, but using different fabrics. I made error after error and gave up. Finally, 5 years later, I went back to it and finished the second one. Then in 2023, our youngest was having his first child, and a friend asked if I was going to make a quilt. Without hesitation, I said, no, I can't do that without Mom, as she's no longer with us. But my friend encouraged me, and so after a bit, I found a free pattern online, which seemed easy enough. So I made a crib-size Irish chain quilt. I found someone online who machine quilted it and hand-sewed the border for me. Working on that quilt, I realized how much work Mom helped with on the first 2 quilts. She would pin fabrics together, I'd sew, and she'd iron while I was sewing the next section. This time, I had to do it all myself. The hardest and most frustrating part for me is picking fabrics, as I can't envision what it will look like until I sew blocks together. What's in my head somehow doesn't always match reality. I've purchased lots of material and sewn until I finally get it right. My twin granddaughters watched this quilt come together and then wanted to make one themselves. So last summer, I gave them all the fabrics and scraps I had, and they each started to learn how to sew on the sewing machine. I'm not one to teach to sew, but we went with it. I love that their quilts have no pattern and it's not matchy, just putting pieces together row by row. One of the first things Mom taught me was quilting does not need to be matchy. She was part of a group where everyone gave fabric to each other with no intention of matching fabrics, and they made a small wall-hanging quilt. The colors and fabric patterns of Mom's were so random, but still came together and are beautiful. The twins have done amazingly well. We're not done with the quilts yet, but we're getting there. They stop for a couple of months at a time and come back to it. I'm hoping this summer we can get them done, as they're so close. They keep thinking they need it bigger. I do have one of Mom's quilts that is not finished that my one sister wanted once it was done. I believe all the blocks are completed. It's just a matter of putting it all together. I plan on starting that this summer too, and surprising my sister. Thanks for asking about my experience. When I retire, I hope to quilt more often. I enjoy it, just not great at it. It's all a learning experience. I've really enjoyed helping the twins as they're learning from errors as well. Our next project, I think, will be using fat quarters. And that's from Janet. I think one of the reasons Janet's story resonates is that she's so honest about all of it. The struggles, the errors, the moments of almost giving up, and also the moments that made her keep going. Let's take a moment to celebrate the full circle happening in Janet's story. Her mom taught her that quilting doesn't need to be matchy. Janet's now passing that exact lesson on to her twin granddaughters, letting them sew scraps together row by row with no pattern and no rules. That is what we call building a quilting legacy. Today's WIP-Finishing tip was basically handed to me by Janet herself because she described something I hear from quilters all the time. She said the hardest and most frustrating part for her is picking fabrics because she can't envision what it will look like until the blocks are already sewn together. And by then, she's already discovered it's not right and has to start over. So here's my tip. Make a test block or 2 before you commit to a full project. This sounds simple, but so many quilters skip this step. Before you cut all your fabric for a new quilt, take the fabrics you're considering and sew just 2 or 3 blocks together at the actual finished size. Don't worry about getting them perfect. Just sew them, lay them out, and step back. And, this is the key part, take a photo with your phone and convert it to black and white. This is an old trick that strips away the color so all you can see is value, meaning the contrast between lights and darks. If your quilt pattern disappears in the black and white photo because your fabrics are too similar in value, you'll know before you've cut into 3 yards of fabric that it isn't going to work. A couple of quick follow-through options to make this even easier. First, if you have a design wall or even just a piece of batting pinned to the wall, put your test blocks up there and walk away for 10 minutes. Come back with fresh eyes. You'll often see immediately whether the combination is working. Second, Squint your eyes when you look at your test blocks. Squinting your eyes blurs the detail and lets you see the overall contrast and color balance, almost like looking at a thumbnail of your quilt. It sounds a little silly, but it works. Third, if you can't quite visualize how the full quilt will look from a few test blocks, try laying them on a surface that's different from your fabrics. A dark table if your fabrics are light, or a light-colored bed if your fabrics are dark. That contrast makes it much easier to see whether the blocks are reading the way you want them to. This small step of making test blocks can save you so much time and fabric. A few test blocks first is totally worth it, and you can even do something with them afterwards. I'll drop a link in the show notes for a blog post about what to do with those extra or orphan blocks. Hopefully, it'll spark some ideas for you. One more thing before I let you go today, because it connects directly to everything we just talked about with visualizing your fabrics before you sew. If you've ever wished that you could just experiment with coloring in your quilt before you commit to it, good news, you can. A lot of quilt designers, myself included, offer coloring pages as part of their patterns or as a free resource, and they're such an underrated tool. You can literally print out a line drawing of the quilt block or layout, grab some colored pencils, and try out different combinations right there on the page. No cutting, no sewing, well, I've already sewn 3 blocks, so I guess we're going with it. Just good old pencil and paper experimentation, which is kind of fun and relaxing in and of itself. I have free quilt coloring pages available for most of my patterns, and you can snag them through my Quilting Freebies All Access Pass, which is completely free to sign up for. The link is in the show notes. And if you're working from someone else's pattern, it's worth checking to see if they have a coloring page too, because so many designers are including them. A simple set of colored pencils and a printed coloring sheet can save you so much of the back and forth that Janet described, and that so many of us have experienced. Buying fabric, sewing it up, realizing it's not quite right, and starting over. But a little coloring session first? Both fun and crazy helpful. All right, that's a wrap on episode 10. A huge thank you to Janet for sharing her story so openly and generously. I hope it inspired you as much as it inspired me. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of the First Stitch podcast. If you enjoyed listening, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd hit the subscribe button in your favorite podcast player, write a review on Apple Podcasts, or tell your best quilty friends so they can listen too.